Hey guys, welcome back. We are here for chapter 2 on communication. I have Janice McFarland, Director of Clinical Services. We are excited to get back into it and just talk a little bit more about communication. Hope you guys enjoy this episode.
For suicide and mental health issues, I have to really believe that silence kills death.
How we might even be projecting things on people and we don't even know that we're doing it.
There's a lot of people around and a lot of resources available to problem solve those things.
Okay, give me a week. I will problem solve it.
First of all, get out of my brain.
We're back. So we are back to talk about communication. At the time that we've been filming this is right during a time of chaos and stress for the whole country. And we even put out a communication post, how to be during times where maybe the people in the world that we expect to kind of have things under control don't.
The past couple of weeks, we're recording this on, what day is it? January 13th. So a week ago, some things happened that people had many opinions about, many thoughts about. It really upset me to see how people were treating other people that they were communicating with in, online and things like that. People who had opposite beliefs about what had happened or opposite thoughts about what had happened. It really gets to me every time I see something like that. Two of the sentences that I wrote in that post were that differences are necessary and disrespect is not. This kind of goes back to the point that we were talking about the last time we filmed about communication, that most of us are kind of doing it wrong. Like basic communication, most of us are doing it wrong. We're communicating to try to convince instead of trying to understand. It's as if we approach our communication really selfishly. We want somebody else to tell us what they think and believe so that we can convince them that that is not correct and that there's another way. Here's my way. Instead of trying to explain to people, well, this is what I think, and maybe this is how we're different, and just accepting those differences. It's like we're constantly in a state of us against them. And it's not healthy. It's been a really stressful time for people's mental health over the past almost 12 months. I mean, we're coming up on, I think the first confirmed case of COVID in the United States was in the middle, towards the end of January. And then everything kind of changed for all of us. People's mental health has really suffered. Overdoses are up, suicides are up, depression rates are up, anxiety is up. People are experiencing stress in a way that they've never experienced stress before. And then we have all of this other crazy stuff outside of our control happening. Just because somebody believes something different from me doesn't mean that the relationship can't go forward. I saw a few people commenting things like, if you think something about what had happened at the Capitol on the 6th, then I'm blocking you and deleting you and won't be talking to you. Like long-term friendships ending because somebody else has a difference of opinion. That's really what our country was founded on, was to give people the opportunity to have a difference of opinion. So the fact that we're vilifying each other for it right now is just so opposite of, I think, how maybe we would be reacting to it. Maybe if all of this, if the election and all of these things had happened, maybe not in the middle of a global pandemic, maybe rhetoric among friends would be different, but it was just really disheartening to see that.
People are making those decisions to end communication or end friendship really around differences in perception. So ultimately we have different opinions, but those opinions are based in seeing the events differently. Republicans or Trump supporters probably saw the events of the Capitol differently than Democrats and Biden supporters because they're coming from different perspectives, they're different interests, different points of view, and already a history of opinions of we don't like this person, we don't like that person. So that's going to affect the way we perceive that. People have to see it my way. Like my way is the only way. Typically, if you are trying to force something, no matter how great it is, onto people without them having a voice in it, it doesn't work very well. A person on welfare is going to see policy around welfare differently than someone who has a mansion and 15 cars. But yet we try to communicate to people as if everybody should be seeing it the same way.
Last night we were talking about communication, like break down barriers, assumptions that we make as professionals, and how dangerous that can be, just assuming the way that we define a word is the same when someone else uses that word. Like sometimes we need to check for understanding. I was sharing with them about an experience I had where I was communicating with somebody about the way that they were living their life. They said, I don't mind living a simple life. And I said, well, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. And then they said, but I would like to be able to buy shampoo when I need it. And I just had a moment as a professional where I was like, we're not talking about the same thing, Janice. The vision in your mind when somebody says a simple life is not the same experience that this person is having. You need to ask some questions and get to understand what a simple life means to this individual that you are speaking to. Because in that moment, I recognized I didn't understand what she was talking about. I assumed that because I fancy myself a pretty smart lady, I understood the context of all the words she was using. And then really quickly through an example, understood I didn't. And situations like that are a really great example that you can have the dictionary memorized front and back, but people use language in a way that's constantly changing. And we have to check to make sure that we're speaking the same language, that we're using the same words in the same ways.
We think communication's so simple, but in reality, it's not. There's actually a lot that goes into it. There's a lot that affects it. There's so much going on. It is so complex to kind of make it sound so simple that everybody just hears the words the same way that you intended them to go out of your mouth is a little naive, because there's so much, all this information that comes into our brain is filtered through all these experiences. So understanding, I think, is what is so important, is that if you really want people to understand your perspective, hear them first.
For as long as humans have been communicating, we've been trying to define and understand how communication works. And there are tons of models that exist in like the academic space that you can look up. The one that I use most often, last segment we were talking about when there was a little bit of a communication breakdown in one of the departments that I supervise at the agency. This is the model that I went to help define and understand where our vulnerabilities were in our communication system as a team. It's called the transaction model of communication. Really simple early understandings of how communication worked was that there was a sender and a receiver of information, and then there was a message. 3 pieces. Seems pretty easy to understand, which I think sometimes is maybe how people still think about communication. The transaction model of communication acknowledges, yes, there is a sender and there a receiver, but those roles flip-flop over and over again. And the two of you are creating a meaning about the things that you are discussing that is distinct to the communication that you are having based on the physical and psychological context of your relationship, based on the cultural context of your pre-existing relationship, on the relational context, and on the social context. We were talking about power differentials last time. That would be potentially a social context or a psychological context. If you are trying to communicate with a probation officer, an abuser, maybe you're a teenager, you broke the rules and you know that your mom wants to talk to you about it later. All of that flavors how that instance of communication exists. Because most of the time, like even in our relational context between you and I is pretty safe, pretty secure, pretty solid. But there are times that we've had to have some like not super comfortable conversations with each other while we understood that relationally we had enough stability to have those uncomfortable conversations. The psychological context of that was very uncomfortable. And so there's more of an opportunity for miscommunication. So being aware of all of these things that are independently flavoring each communication that you have with somebody. We talked last time about how people aren't stagnant, people change. So to assume that you are approaching somebody and they're going to be the same every time is a really flawed way to look at people. And it's really a flawed way to think about communication. Because I have a positive communication history with this person, that means that my communication will always be positive. That's just not accurate.
A lot of what you're talking about is history of experience. So what's my experience? And I think of like parents and child. Like we talk about this in collaborative problem solving, that approaches to intervention. So there's the plan A approach, which is I'm going to impose my will. And that's kind of what we're talking about today. It's like everybody's trying to impose their will. You're going to see it my way. And this is the type of thing. So an example in parenting would be if you don't do this, you're going to get some type of consequence. You better comply. So you're going to comply to my will and expectations. And that's really what's most important to me at that time. On the flip side of that coin of do this, you'll get a reward at the end of the week. That's still kind of imposing my will. I want you to do what I want. If I change to the more collaborative approach, which is I really want to hear what your concerns are that are getting in the way of why you're not doing what I've asked you to do. And then we're going to talk about it and come up with a plan to try to resolve it so we can both be successful and both get our concerns met. The kid is ultimately, if you've been plan A your whole life and you try a different approach, the kid's brain is going to be like, I don't care how he or she's trying to talk to me. I know I'm going to get a consequence at the end of this. So they have to experience a sense of safety and communication or it doesn't, work.
I've worked with some parents over the years that it's like the opposite of that dynamic between parent and child. Most of my clinical work has been with adult addicts. Most of them were parents, and there's a huge challenge in changing the way that you communicate with your children when you enter recovery, when you enter sobriety. Most of these parents were very plan C, which in collaborative problem solving is the other end of the spectrum from plan A, where you're going to do what I say and I'm going to bribe you with a reward or punish you with something that you don't want to happen. Plan C is like, well, I'll just let it go because your temper tantrum isn't worth it, or maybe I decided that I could just do it myself. There's just constantly a letting go, a dropping of the expectation of whatever it is that we're asking. And so like the power differential kind of flips between parent and child. The child needs to trust that the parent is going to follow through and hold to a boundary, to hold to an expectation. And then the parent needs to become brave enough to trust that their child isn't going to throw a hissy fit, or brave enough and courageous enough that if they do throw a hissy fit, if they don't like what I'm about to say, I'm strong enough not to give into that. So both sides have deficits to overcome. It's just interesting that, your experience and the way that you talk about it, also because you're a parent, is so different from how I've kind of seen that play out, and like the different barriers that people have to get over trying to develop more healthy ways of communicating.
Be transparent. Like, hey, I've been this way for such a long time and I really want to change the way I approach things. So give me some time because it's going to take some work because I'm not used to it. But at least you're kind of throwing it out there instead of where people might perceive it as, oh, you're trying to manipulate me, or it's some type of trick.
The thing with my clients is most of the time they go from being plan C parents to they want to be plan A or plan B parents. And their kids are looking at them like, girlfriend, you have tried this with me. I am now 15 years old. You've tried this 20 times. Never once have you stuck with it longer than 2 weeks. I'm not changing anything because I changed the first 15 times and then I got a little jaded and I'm sick of being let down. Your child is absolutely correct in feeling that way. And I'm really glad that they shared with you verbally that thing that they just said that you're telling me really hurts your feelings. I'm super glad that they shared that with you. Now you understand what their concern is. Now you understand why they are having a hard time with that. We have the concern on the table. We can do something with that. We can move forward with that.
The intention is there to do right or to do well. Kids do well if they can. People do well if they can. It's not this, you're just wanting to cause all these problems or be this way, or because the way you, in the nature of how bad things were that day at the Capitol and how probably scared there were people out there that were really scared, people like looking at the world going, oh my gosh, this world has gone to whatever, HE double hockey sticks.
There was a lot of hyperbolic speech about the consequences of what was happening and stuff. And I'm sure the people who said them felt that they were speaking correctly, but at the same time, it was very kind of like doomsday-ish, and I think maybe meant to be very scary, which definitely doesn't help people stay regulated and make an objective decision about how to react to events that they're seeing unfold.
Ultimately, there's something behind it. People don't just kind of wake up and go, I want to be a bad person or I want to do bad things. When you listen first, we're really trying to work together. We're really trying to come up with a solution that is best for all of us, rather than you got to do it my way, or even in parenting. Okay, the house is a mess and we have to clean it up. I mean, that if we can get both people engaged in that goal of not wanting to live in chaos, then we can, solve those problems.
There's 3 basic tenets of the program of AA, of Alcoholics Anonymous. honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. And if you approach all communication, if you approach intending to listen first, and you approach each opportunity to communicate with those three things, I'm going to be honest in this, I'm going to be open-minded, and I'm going to be willing to really listen, because there's a difference between hearing what someone is saying and listening to them. Hearing is what our ears do. Listening is when our brain gets engaged in deciphering what those sound waves are that are coming into our ears. We have to be willing to decipher those messages that we are receiving from the other person in an open-minded way in order to honestly communicate with people.
One of the things also about communication, I think, is that what people might not realize, the part you're talking about that of the brain that's engaging, you're talking about the cortex, which is your thinking part of the brain, the most powerful part of our brain. But then there are also these lower systems in the brain at the bottom of our brain, brain stem and survival brain. It's been referred to as a lot of different things.
The metaphor I love the most is an ice cream scoop. The lower brain, the survival brain, is the ice cream cone. And then the cortex is the scoop of ice cream that goes on top.
That's definitely the best part of the ice cream, right? Which is the thing that can do the most and is the most powerful part. But the lower system is always surveying the world to see where threat is, because our number one job of the brain is to stay alive. Because if we don't stay alive, then we can't procreate, then we can't keep our genetics moving on in the world. So we're always surveying the world, surveying everything that's going on around us for threat. So when we start communication and we don't have that in mind, like if I come in, okay, I want to talk to you, and I'm just going to come in and just start unloading what my issue is, I have not respected the fact that your brain is probably feeling threatened at that point and is going to shut down. And so the ice cream,
it's like the sad moment in every movie where somebody goes to lick their ice cream cone and then it just plops off onto the ground.
Right. It goes away, or it's just bland ice cream. It's not, very tasty because it's not really, active. And so we actually make it harder for ourselves to get the other person to see things from our perspective, if that's what our goal is in trying to talk to them. Get you to do a chore or complete paperwork or whatever that, the task may be. So, safety is number one in all communication. Who are the greatest leaders out there, and what do they convey? Concern for others, confidence, poise, calmness. They don't freak out under pressure. The more intense you are in your communication, the less of your message that's going to get processed and understood. You're going to be processing the information based on that threat, which is what the heck's wrong with this person? We have to be regulated before we try to, number one, receive communication, but also to try to give it.
It's like we're just not patient enough with each other sometimes. I know sometimes I've been guilty of that in my role at the agency. Somebody would say hey, I need to talk to you. And I'd be like, you have 3 minutes. And then I have to do something else. And looking back on it, people probably didn't feel like I was really mentally present for them, because they knew that I was already thinking about and watching the clock to not be late to the next thing that I had going on or whatever. Right. And so now, we talked about last session, just ask for permission before you share. Ask for permission before you engage in a conversation. Even if it doesn't feel like a big, heavy, important conversation, make sure that somebody has the brain space to give you a really good quality return communication.
And I think it happens to the best of us. I mean, and if we're not regulated because we're feeling overwhelmed, we're stressed, or there's a lot on our mind, then it's going to be hard for us to be present. And in any communication, and this is critical for us as counselors, is that if I have somebody in my office for therapy, my brain can't be thinking about what we're having for dinner tonight. I got to get this paperwork done or whatever, or because now we're doing a disservice to the client. Now, probably everybody out there who's been in therapy has probably had that experience where you felt like your therapist wasn't present, because we're all human and we all make that. But we have to make concerted efforts to be present in any conversation we have. Mm-hmm. And you bring something that's been really present in my mind is did we both agree to have this conversation right now? You want to come tell me all these things that you want me to change or do or whatever, but mm-hmm. Did you really see if I was ready for that type of conversation? Because ultimately, my brain's going to perceive that as a threat, and I'm going to resist. I'm either going to shut down and not pay attention, and just give you this, whatever, please go away. Or I'm going to be like fighting back. How dare you talk to me like that? Or, ultimately that person coming in was not wanting that result, but that's what they got, because it's like, my emergency has to be your emergency too. So we're going to deal with this right now. I'd like to talk about this particular topic. Are you okay with talking about that? Or when can we talk about that? Or having a structure already in place for communication, like supervision, or just kind of weekly coffee get-togethers where we can talk about stuff to where I know during this structured time, this is when we talk about things. Not spur of the moment, impulsive, let me roar at you because I'm upset.
And there's, back to what you were saying with the structured time of a therapy session, and how it is our job as counselors to make sure that we are not just physically present, but also mentally present and attuned to the person in the room with us. We are there to provide them a service. All of us have had circumstances where we have had to bring our mind back to being mentally present. We're not a bad communicator if that happens. Your brain is constantly looking for things around it. You're going to get distracted every once in a while. Bring yourself back and use the skill of transparency that you talked about before. And one of the most powerful tools that I have found in communication is apology, genuine apology. That, if you find yourself distracted and you're in the middle of a session and then you snap yourself back, being transparent and saying, I'm so sorry. Can we please go back? I want to make sure that I understood what you said. This is what I got. Is this what you wanted to make sure that I understood about what you were just sharing? Because everybody's a human. Parents are human. Presidents are human. Leaders are human. Employees are human. We are all human beings. And we are all just as flawed as the person sitting next to us. And so if we want people to give us grace in times of strife, we also have to be willing to reciprocate that.
The brain, rupture and repair. So two things that are important. One is rupture always happens. Like we can't, every relationship there's going to be a rupture, and that's okay. That's part of the process. And in fact, that's how we probably improve our relationship, because we start working on problems and we start resolving issues. And, apology doesn't make us weak. It makes us more aware of what we're doing and how we're affecting people. And it also is more respectful of people.
Yet let's take that idea of like apology doesn't make you weak and take it even one step further to, I think, a major problem in people's ability to communicate effectively is this fear of being wrong. Nobody wants to be wrong. And it just, on a human level, I guess, like on an instinctual level, I guess I understand. What is there to fear from being wrong? Fight or flight response still gets triggered when we are afraid of being wrong. But what are the consequences of being wrong? Consequences of being wrong are admitting that you were wrong, having to change an opinion or a view of something because you were incorrect. Like the stakes really aren't that high if we talk about survival, the way that it relates to our brain's response to fear, but it creates so many problems in our ability to have successful human relationships.
How you think you're going to be perceived if you're wrong. So like, okay, so I'm in a leadership position. I'm at the top of my agency. And so am I afraid to be wrong because then people will lose faith in me or lose their trust in me? I think that's all like in my head, those questions, and not checked with reality. Because no one's ever said, well, because you were wrong in this situation, I no longer believe in you. And I think that's what happens with politicians and leaders out that are more visible to the world and maybe have to answer more to the world, that the last thing they want to do is be wrong, because, and part of that is I don't blame them to a certain extent, because of how easy people backlash when things like this happen. This is seen in the professional sports world. Someone makes a bad coaching call and they get vilified the next day on talk shows. So why would you? We actually kind of have a culture oftentimes that doesn't allow for that very easily. So it does take a particularly strong person to kind of say, yeah, I was wrong. I made a misstep, but this is what I'm learning from it. And I find that if people continue with a decision that is wrong because they're afraid to be seen as wrong only makes them look worse anyways. They're not thinking of the people around them. They're only thinking about themselves.
That moment that you're talking about of somebody being able to be like, I'm wrong. I'm sorry. This is what I'm learning from it. Most of the time, those moments come after a confrontation or an argument. And I think confrontation, like the word in and of itself and the concept of it, has gotten kind of a bad rap. Confrontation, kind of by definition, is not a yelling, screaming match where everybody's emotions are very heightened. Confrontation is asking someone to clarify something that you do not find to be equitable. So if somebody says that 2 + 2 = 4 on one day, and then the next day they say 2 + 2 = 5, it is a confrontation to say, hey, you did this equation differently on 2 different days. Which one of those examples should I follow? Then the other person who you have confronted is given an opportunity to level with you. The point of confrontation is to get people to level, to give you their honest concern, their honest reaction. And a lot of times I think confrontation, we come off defensive when somebody confronts us. Well, I didn't say that. I didn't mean that. Whatever the situation is, when really a lot of times all that's needed is just an acknowledgement, a leveling with the other person that the way that you are perceiving my actions or my words is not incorrect.
Confronting is a word that kind of gives me a visceral like activation in my body because of working with challenging kids and residential. Confronting was a big word that was used, that we have to confront, and confronting the problem or confronting the person. When we are confronting the person, we are saying there's something wrong with you and you need to change. And that is way more threatening than this is something that you've asked of me to do, but here's the issue that I'm running into. Can you help me resolve this? It's confronting the problem. I saw time and time again, whereas as adults with children, that we confront the child when they're doing something wrong. And it's like, well, you're confronting the person as if the impression is that they did that on purpose and that they were trying to be bad. And so, of course, you're going to get somebody who's going to be resistant and defiant, and it's not productive, and it actually creates more problems, not less. When we're talking about confronting, because it usually is used in a way where it's going against the person and not trying to address the problem. When we're confronting, we have to confront the problem, the situation that is not working, not the person itself. I know there's probably elements where it's like, okay, you keep doing this to me, like you keep yelling and screaming at me, so I need to kind of address that. And that's fine. There are moments.
But even then, you can address the behavior and not the person. Words, labels, jerk, various cursey words, like that should be left out of confrontation, because you are just setting the absolute wrong tone with the person who you are trying to convince to stop being mean to you. Approaching somebody and saying, hey, when you speak to me like that, it's really hard for me to then feel comfortable enough with you to behave like a partner. I'm not saying anything about you. I'm talking about your behavior.
And going back to kind of collaborative problem solving, we're problem solving the situations, the expectations, the triggers that bring on that behavior, not the behavior itself. Because we can.
Right.
I saw a quote. It's like you can't solve a behavior, but you can solve the problem that leads to the behavior. And so that's what we're looking at. So this expectation is really a problem, is really difficult or challenging. So let's try to resolve that. What's challenging about that expectation? To summarize from my perspective, number one, creating a situation where both people feel safe to have that communication, to have that dialogue.
Nobody likes to be attacked. Nobody likes to feel like they are constantly defending themselves. And, a really easy way to kind of check yourself before you enter a conversation, a situation where you may have to talk about some uncomfortable things. You may have to reiterate some boundaries. You may have to clearly communicate how you feel with somebody. Take just a second and put yourself in that person's shoes and think to yourself, how would I want someone to approach me about this? Because chances are, if we do that little check, there's this saying, don't miss the forest for the trees. We get so caught up on one small thing that we miss the big picture of how this one small thing fits into the rest of it. It seems that the things that people are willing to communicate about, the things that people are willing to level with a person about, they're trees and not the forest. And so you can spend your whole life fighting about trees and never grow a healthy forest. Taking that perspective, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, and just realizing I'm not the only tree in the world. I'm not the only person in the world. Maybe let me put myself in somebody else's shoes. I would venture to say that most of the time when we do that, we are going to be much kinder to the people that we need to communicate with.
What is more important, you saying what you want to say or them receiving what you're saying the correct way, or, for them to be more receptive to what you have to say? The way I always communicate to people that are really struggling with getting people to be receptive, and got to change the way you're approaching this because they're not receptive to the way you're doing it now. And the goal is for them to be receptive to what you're saying. So, all right, I think we're going to kind of end this chapter on this chapter 2 of communication. Certainly communicate any questions you guys might have, topics that you guys would love to hear us talk about, because we're always in the goal of educating and supporting. So take care.